These are the most disturbing cases that happened in the Fallout community, and as the video goes on, each one will get a little freakier and progressively worse. Grand Prairie is a city in northwestern Alberta, Canada, with around 65,000 residents, and back in 2017, it had 3 times the crime rate of an average Canadian city and nowhere near enough police officers to keep up with it. But while crimes and violence were common in the city, no one could have known that when Fallout New Vegas came out in 2010, it's going to lead one of the most interesting incidents in the history of the city. The game, in case you don't know, is set in a world where nuclear war has reduced civilization to rubble and several groups fight to control what little is left of it. One of those groups is the New California Republic, or NCR for short, which is a government that tries to bring order to the chaos. Representing that government is one of the game's most popular characters, a hardened soldier called the NCR Veteran Ranger. And for a man I'll call Simon, who lived in Grand Prairie and was a huge Fallout New Vegas fan, this character was soon about to change his life. Because as he played the game more and more, he started to feel drawn towards the Veteran Ranger, and before long, he started imagining himself dressed like the character, and as his fascination grew, he started to collect everything he needed to put together a ranger costume. But soon Simon realized that he wouldn't be able to make the full costume on his own, and so on Tuesday, April 11th, 2017, he put on his nearly complete NCR Veteran Ranger costume as he walked out of his house and headed towards the Bell Tower shopping center. On his way there, a few pedestrians stared, and some drivers even slowed down, but Simon kept walking, not knowing how closely he was being watched. Just before 5 p.m, Simon arrived at the shopping center, and he went into a tailor shop that was owned by a guy named Hua Huin, whose help Simon needed to finish his costume. Meanwhile, people who had seen him going into the shop panicked and called the police to report what they had seen. The callers had told dispatchers it looked like a strange man had a bomb strapped to his back, mistaking the accessories on Simon's NCR Veteran Ranger costume for an explosive vest. Within minutes, 8 officers responded to the calls because the situation was being treated as a real bomb threat. The police knew which shop Simon had gone into, and their aim was to get everyone who was inside out safely. And so when the police officers get out of their vehicles at the shopping center, their guns were already drawn, and they immediately took cover. Simon had already been inside Hua's business for a few minutes, and he didn't know that the police were outside and had surrounded the building. While Hua was helping him, his phone rang and he stepped away to take the call, and it was the police who were on the other end of the line. The police told Hua to stay calm and asked if he could see any wires on Simon. He told them that he could, and they instructed him to leave quietly through the back entrance. Once he was out of the building, the police turned their attention to Simon. After a few minutes, the police managed to speak with Simon, and when they did, Simon asked them if he could explain what was going on. When he did, the police finally learned that Simon was just trying to get some adjustments done to his cosplay costume. The costume had pretty much everything: a gas mask, a helmet, body armor, an ammo belt, a long trench coat, and even the New California Republic faction flag. And strapped to his back were several empty Pringle cans that had been painted silver, which the bystanders had assumed were explosives. The entire situation calmed down once the police knew Simon was not a threat, and they lowered their weapons. Because he had not committed a crime, he was allowed to leave and go home without being charged. A local freelance photographer, William Varvick, took photos of the police response and the incident. These photos were the only images taken of the whole event. CBC News used William's photos and also interviewed Canadian Police Corporal Sean Graham, who explained that the police had to treat situations like this one as real until they were proved to be otherwise. "There's a time and place for it," he said, pointing out that costumes are okay at conventions and similar events, but as he said, "wandering around downtown is maybe not the place to do it." By April 13th, 2 days after the incident, news outlets picked up on the story. Kotaku, a video game website and blog, said that this wasn't the first time costume props had been mistaken for real weapons. They said that with so many bombings and shootings in the news, anything that looks like a weapon can make people panic. And just over a year and 7 months later, on September 17th, 2018, people spoke about the incident on Reddit. Even though so much time had passed, there were over 400 comments in the thread, and people discussed whether the police response was appropriate or if Simon had been reckless. One Reddit user said, "Is it a shock that a person in a gas mask and body armor with a bandolier and realistic-ish looking weapons walking around in a non-cosplay festival situation was taken seriously?" And to that comment, someone replied, "I remember a similar incident like that with someone who was cosplaying an Umbrella Corps soldier and was going into stores. Not a good idea. Please use some common sense with cosplay." Another user shared their thoughts. "He is lucky it was Canada and not USA, or he would end up dead." Simon walked away with a story to tell, but the man in the next case couldn't say the same because the game cost him everything.
What takes it from fun to video game addiction, Mayor?
Aaron, that's the million-dollar question. How much is too much?
Fallout 4 was one of the most anticipated games of 2015, and when it finally came out, it became one of the best-selling games of the year. And when a man from the city of Krasnoyarsk in Russia came across the Fallout 4 trailer, it immediately caught his eye. And even though the man already had a pretty full life that included a wife, family, friends, and work, he still downloaded the game anyway, without knowing that in the next 21 days, his life as he knew it would be turned upside down. It was 2015, and a 28-year-old man who I will call Scott started playing Fallout 4, and as time went by, he became more sucked into the game. Late nights of playing Fallout 4 turned into full days, then missed work days, and before long, he wasn't showing up for work at all. Scott's wife, who I'll call Catherine, noticed a huge difference in him, and every time she tried to speak to him about how much time he was spending playing the game, he simply wouldn't listen. Eventually, Catherine could not take it anymore, and she asked him for a divorce, and around the same time, his obsession with the game had become so bad that he lost his job. With his life falling apart before his eyes, Scott knew he needed to do some soul-searching, but it was already too late, as his 3-week Fallout gaming binge had already cost him his job and family. And this is when Scott decided that he needed to get some advice from a lawyer. According to the news outlet Russia Today, Scott reached out to a Russian consumer rights law firm called United Legal Defense Center, whose lawyers protect people from unfair business practices and scams. After consulting with the lawyer, he sued both Bethesda, which is the video game developer that owns Fallout, and Soft Club, a Russian game distributor that sells the game. In his lawsuit, Scott wanted 500,000 rubles, roughly $7,000, because he claimed the game had caused him serious mental and psychological harm. And Scott also gave this statement to Russia Today.
If I knew that this game could have become so addictive, I would have become a lot more wary of it. I would not have bought it, or I would have left it until I was on holiday or until the New Year holidays.
The United Legal Defense Center viewed the lawsuit as a chance to challenge Russian law. They knew the odds were against them, as courts rarely ruled in favor of someone blaming a foreign company for their personal struggles. And about 6 weeks after Fallout 4 launched, Business Insider picked up Scott's story. On December 21st, 2015, under the headline,
"A Fallout 4 player is suing the game's developers, claiming it was so addictive it cost him his job and wife."
They mentioned that this wasn't the first time a gamer had tried to sue over addiction. In 2009, a disabled US veteran named Craig Smallwood filed a suit against another game developer. Craig said,
"I was unable to function independently in usual daily activities such as getting up, getting dressed, bathing, or communicating with family and friends."
Despite a judge agreeing to hear the case, Craig walked away with nothing. And unsurprisingly, Scott's case followed a similar path. And even though a judge in Krasnoyarsk initially agreed to hear it, the case was thrown out in the end. The court ruled that Scott had made his own choices and that he chose to keep playing, skipping work, and neglect his health. Since the game worked as intended and had nothing wrong with it, the developers couldn't be held responsible for what he did with it. Bethesda and Soft Club never had anything to say publicly about this case. Prioritizing a game cost Scott his marriage and job, but in the next case, what developers put into a game caused a scandal, ruined reputations, and deeply disturbed players.
More than 150 million Americans are estimated to play video games. 60% of them do so every day. Now researchers want to know how gaming impacts the brain.
In May 2014, a mod creator known as Maybe Next Time, who I will call Joe, came up with the idea for a new game mod that would be called Fallout: The Frontier. He'd been inspired by another mod, the Rockwell Pursuit, which is a mission where players hunt down a scientist across a frozen post-apocalyptic landscape. Joe reached out to two well-known modders named Dylan Hollis and Some Guy 2000 to lead the project, but they were too busy to take on the task. But soon, help was at hand when his friend Hopper31, another well-known modder and developer, joined him. But little did they know that their passion project is eventually going to end in a way none of them saw coming. When they started to plan the mod, Joe and Hopper31 decided to use features from the upcoming Winter is Coming mod. Then the men, along with help from another modder, Macintroll, a known texture artist, began creating the Snowy Wasteland. 9 months later, on March 17th, 2015, the first official trailer for Fallout: The Frontier was released to the public. Once the trailer dropped, things went quiet, but behind the scenes, the developers were working hard to bring the mod to life. Just over a year later, on Tuesday, April 26, 2016, at 11:56 p.m., Joe posted on Reddit saying that he couldn't believe 2 years had already passed since they started and 1 year since the trailer dropped. He then invited fans to ask questions and thanked followers for all the support. Reddit fans reached out to him with their questions, and some wanted advice on how they could play a role in making games. Someone even asked if there were any big-name people in the Fallout community working on the project. Joe replied, saying that there were at least 30 to 40 active members on the team and over 100 modders had contributed to it. By August 20th, 2020, the developers posted on Facebook letting their fans know that they were almost done with the mod. It had new storylines, side missions, weapons, armor, vehicles, and dialogue. Then, just over 4 months later, the development team finally made an announcement on Twitter on December 26, 2020, saying that the Frontier's stated release date is January 15th, 2021. Along with that post was a preview of the mod. One fan reposted the announcement and said they'd been waiting since their freshman year of high school for this. Others also replied to the post, saying they couldn't wait for the mod's release and sharing their excitement. 21 days later, on January 15th, 2021, the Frontier mod team announced on Twitter that in 15 hours it would be released, and fans who were excited for the mod's release shared their thoughts. People left comments like,
"I can't wait to try it out,"
and
"What time exactly is it scheduled to release?"
Finally, at 10:13 p.m. that night, the team posted on Twitter again, and this time they had only 6 words to say.
"Fallout: The Frontier is now available."
But not even an hour after the announcement, players were struggling to download it. One player pointed out that everyone can't download from the Nexus site at the same time. The mod hit 82,000 downloads so fast that it crashed the Nexus website. Fortunately, by the next day, the server was back online, so players could download the mod again. At long last, the team was able to celebrate the results of 7 years of volunteer work. The mod development team went online again and thanked everyone who supported them in the first 24 hours at 11:44 a.m. And they also thanked everyone who helped crash Nexus. The response was almost immediate, and 4 minutes later, a fan replied to the post and said they were enjoying the mod. Then the Twitter post went quiet. But that's not the end of the story for the mod development team, because within days of its launch, many players complained about disturbing content in the mod. Players discovered a storyline about a character called America who had stunted emotional development. She was 18 years old, and when players enslaved her, the in-game dialogue was inappropriate and suggested that she enjoyed it. Some players also flagged an intimate scene involving a Deathclaw, one of the game's most fearsome creatures. Developers later described the scene as an unfinished joke about the Wild Wasteland. Wild Wasteland being a Fallout game perk that changes in-game content, and some players called out a lizard girl subplot creepy because it's explicit content. By January 25th, 2021, a video was loaded on YouTube of the Deathclaw Segs challenge. The video was shared by a channel named Rostock, depicting the Deathclaw scene I talked about, and received 162,000 views in less than 2 weeks, and to date, it has been viewed over 650,000 times. A viewer of the YouTube video commented,
"Imagine submitting this to your boss and actually getting the go-ahead to put it in the mod."
Another said,
"Today's episode, the writing team's barely disguised disturbing fixation."
2 days after the video was originally posted, on January 27th, 2021 at 9:19 p.m., a moderator named Phobos95 made an announcement on the mod's Discord server. The announcement said that the development team had found that one of their developers, Zoo the Skunk, had been posting disturbing, inappropriate depictions of animated characters on their personal art accounts online, and that the team wanted nothing to do with it. Not long after the announcement, Zoo the Skunk was removed from the team and banned from the group's Discord server. People had already started to connect Zoo the Skunk's online content and the mod's controversial writing, so they distanced themselves from them. Eurogamer, a video gaming news site, shared that Thomas TG Spy, who was the spokesperson for the mod, confirmed that Zoo the Skunk's disturbing lines and content had been removed from the mod. He also said that Zoo the Skunk had no role in the writing and that he had mainly worked on small menu icons and armor and weapon mode icons. According to Thomas, Zoo the Skunk wasn't even listed in the PDF that credits the people who worked on the mod. He also said that some artists who'd worked on the mod wanted their content removed, and it was. Then he confirmed that another version of the mod would be uploaded to Nexus and said that this was going to be the Frontier's last release. Next, he announced he'd be leaving the project and described it as an
infinite bed of stress.
He added that it was painful to watch years of work end this way, but he didn't actually leave the team just yet. The development team also posted on Twitter and said that they'd be distancing themselves from Zoo the Skunk. There were many responses on this post. One of them asked some serious questions.
So let me get this straight. His work had to go through writing, 3D modeling, staging, voice dubbing, and you're telling us that nobody noticed that this story was dangerously explicit? Do you think that people are that dumb not to notice you're looking for a scapegoat?
By February 1st, a cleaned up final version of the mod was ready for players to download. On Nexus Mods, it was downloaded over 100,000 times by March 26, 2021, and that figures has now risen to more than 200,000. The mod team made another announcement on Twitter on April 25, 2021, saying that they would rebuild the main story missions as a separate mod. They also mentioned that they were looking for writers, artists, and modding tool users to help. Fans responded with mixed feelings. One said they never thought they'd see the team make a comeback, while another hoped whoever had written the inappropriate content was no longer involved. Then in October 2021, Thomas announced that he was finally leaving the project and passing the project lead role to another modder named Imperial, who would carry the work forward. After he left, progress on the mod was still difficult. By March 2022, some of the developers were living in Ukraine during the conflict, and 2 other developers left that year, but the team still tried to keep things moving forward. 13 months later, on February 10th, 2023, the team said that the rework would be cancelled due to technical limitations. This announcement meant that the original legacy version was the only one players could play. Then, on Christmas Day 2023, the team posted on Twitter,
"We have removed the NCR main questline, as the time and mental health investment is far too great."
But this wasn't entirely the end, because the team also said they'd already been working on a new project for 7 months called The New Frontier. The goal was to give the contributors' years of work a legacy to be proud of. No date for the release of the new mod was ever given, but according to a Fallout The New Frontier fan site, it could be available between 2027 and 2032. The content that was hidden inside the Frontier was disturbing enough on its own, but in the next case, what looked like the end of a career turned to years of silence, legal battles, a damaged reputation, and an outcome that some didn't expect.
They make up the people, mostly women, who've come forward with stories of being harassed or assaulted in the workplace. Over the past 2 months, dozens of powerful men have been accused of harassment, and it has created a national conversation.
A man sat in a bar in Atlanta, Georgia, having a few drinks with a few friends, who were all in town for a gaming convention that would start the next day. It was an ordinary evening, but by the end of it, a chain of events were set in motion that shaped the next 2 years of one of their lives. Chris Avalone was born on September 27, 1971, and grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. In January 1995, Chris flew to Irvine, California for an interview with Mark O'Green, the guy who helped develop and design Fallout and Fallout 2 at Interplay Entertainment, which was the company behind the game. During the interview, Mark asked Chris how he would design a video game that the company was planning to work on. Chris gave an answer that intrigued Mark, who then hired him as a junior designer. Chris officially joined Interplay Entertainment in January 1995 and worked on creating stories and content for role-playing games. At Interplay, his work on Fallout 2 and Planescape Tournament earned him a reputation as a top writer. Just over 8 years later, in May 2003, Chris left Interplay and co-founded his own video gaming development company called Obsidian Entertainment. There he became the chief creative officer and worked on some major titles like Knights of the Old Republic 2. 7 years later, in 2010, he was the senior designer who worked on Fallout New Vegas and also had control over new additions made to the game.
Chris, welcome. Tell us about Fallout New Vegas and what we can expect from the game.
Well, New Vegas, it takes upon the success of Fallout 3 and basically just gives a brand new experience to the players.
Just over 2 years later, on August 30th, 2012, Chris arrived in Atlanta for DragonCon 2012. Each year, the event took over downtown Atlanta, where hotels and streets were filled with creators, sci-fi and fantasy fans, cosplay, and non-stop events. The event was held for 4 days, from Friday, August 31st to Monday, September 3rd, 2012. A few industry friends met Chris for drinks drinks at a hotel bar the night before the event started. Chris bought drinks for everyone and the group was in good spirits. Later that evening, Chris and 2 other writers walked their friend Carissa Barrows back to her hotel room because she was drunk, and over the next few nights of the convention, Chris and Carissa met up several more times with the same group of people. During the event, Carissa posted some positive tweets about Chris on Twitter and even a photo of them hugging. The caption of the photo even called Chris one of the few gentlemen left in the world.
We are now ready to go with the DragonCon 2012 parade.
DragonCon 2012 opened with a parade on August 31st, 2012. In front of the parade was the piper who led creators and characters through downtown Atlanta. As the music started, people clapped, whistled, and cheered as their favorite characters walked by. Once the parade ended, the convention kicked into full gear across 5 hotels in downtown Atlanta, with over 3,500 hours of programming packed into the weekend. It was a busy weekend for many, and when September 3rd arrived and the convention came to a close, the crowds packed up and headed home, returning to their normal lives. 2 months after the event, Chris was interviewed in a podcast on November 23rd, 2012. Carissa also took part in the podcast and described Chris as being a wonderful creature. Throughout the interview, there was a lot of laughter, and drinking alcohol was referred to a few times.
You like vodka?
Yeah, I know.
Like this.
Everyone likes vodka.
Yeah, you know. Midori.
Everyone loves bears as well, but you know.
At the time, Chris was still the chief creative officer at Obsidian, and he remained in that position for the rest of 2013. He juggled a heavy workload across several major projects as a lead writer, and on top of that, by the time August 2013 came around, he also managed to attend the DragonCon 2013 festival. The event was held from August 30th to September 2nd, 2013, and just like they did the year before, Carissa and Chris met up. This year, she introduced him to one of her close friends, Jackie Izawa. Chris and Jackie got along well, and they began a casual, non-exclusive relationship that lasted about a year. Another year passed, and it was DragonCon time again. This year, the event was held between August 29th and September 1st, 2014. Once again, Chris, Jackie, and even Carissa met up and hung out together. While they were hanging out at a bar, Kerry Bristol, one of Carissa's friends, joined them. During the event, Carissa tried to involve herself in Chris and Jackie's relationship, which caused so much tension that afterwards, Chris stopped talking to Carissa. After 10 months after DragonCon 2014, on June 9th, 2015, Chris posted on Twitter saying that he was leaving Obsidian.
I have left Obsidian Entertainment to accept a sudden opening as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts.
After leaving Obsidian, Chris worked as a freelance writer on several big titles for the next 3 years. He worked on projects like Prey, which was developed by Arcane Studios, a French video game developer, and Divinity Original Sin 2, made by Lyrian Studios. His success appeared to hit an all-time high when, on June 11th, 2018, he appeared on stage at the Microsoft E3 press conference as the story creator of Dying Light 2. The appearance was an important one that linked his name to one of gaming's most anticipated titles. Career-wise, he was doing well. That is, until everything changed for him in 2020.
I really do enjoy party-based games where the parties, obviously a lot of effort was spent into the interactions of the relationships of those characters, how my presence affects that, or changes that, because you feel like an agent of change, which is good.
Chris sat down for a video interview with IGN, one of the biggest gaming websites in the world, on June 18th, 2020. This interview started a roller coaster of serious online allegations against him between June 19th and 21st, 2020. Carissa replied to a post that shared the IGN interview, and the very first thing she said was,
I witnessed and experienced his behavior firsthand. He got me blackout drunk on Midori sours on the company dime. He and 2 friends somehow got me back to my room, where he pounced in front of the other guys. They left after a few moments, also drunk, and one of them told me what he had witnessed the next evening. I had a very vague impression that someone had made out with me when I woke up that morning, but I thought it was a dream. When I asked Chris about it, he told me that I had eventually refused him, but when more of the night came back to me, I realized the only reason I was able to refuse him in my blackout stupor was because I was on my period that weekend. Other nights, I watched him do the same to other girls, some of whom looked far younger than me, and I was in my late 20s at the time. He would disappear with one or another, come back, and then come back to me. I didn't get drunk with him again at DragonCon 2012.
She went on to say,
he was a gentleman about my refusals, including the one where I was drunk off my ass and he escorted me to the subway station at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. That kind of behavior is what not only kept me in denial about what was actually going on, but also drove me to introduce him to one of my best friends, who endured over a year of heartache, gaslighting, and emotional abuse at his hands. It was much easier to see them, and all of us who knew what was going on told her to get out. Eventually she did, but not before he raged out at a restaurant drunk as duck, as usual, leaving her behind, after which point she wandered the downtown streets of a major convention city at night, alone, looking for him because she was worried he would get hurt due to how drunk he was. That was my breaking point.
That post went viral, and before the weekend was over, another woman came forward. Kelly made her own accusations against Chris online. Kelly said,
"I've never admitted this on main, but he me repeatedly at DragonCon 2014 by Pulse. Every time you or his girlfriend wasn't looking, his hand was on my and he was trying to get me to go to his room. I told him I don't duck my friends' boyfriends and to stay the duck away from me."
But this was not the end for Carissa, because the next day she took things a step further and shared the same IGN post, saying,
"While we're at it, here's another man to add to the gaming industry predator garbage pile. Yesterday was the first time I said anything publicly about this, and I'm done being silent despite that duck stick in the reply telling me to shut up. I will not thread."
In Chris's Twitter replies, he told Carissa that he never meant any harm to her and said that he was trying to apologize. But Chris did not address or deny any of the claims that had been made against him. Even when the press asked Chris to comment, he did not respond. Then, in the space of just 3 days, some big names in the gaming industry turned their backs on Chris. Techland, the developer of Dying Light 2, cut ties with him. Gato Salvaje removed him from their project. Electronic Arts said they had no plans to work with him again. And Paradox Interactive confirmed that his contributions to Vampire the Masquerade had been completely removed from the game. With his professional life in decline, Chris stayed out of the public light for the rest of 2020. Then finally, on June 16th, 2021, he broke his silence and filed a lawsuit in the California Superior Court against Carissa and Kelly. On June 26th, 2021, he published his Ending Silence blog posts on Medium. Chris started the post off by saying,
"In 2020, a woman named Carissa made accusations against me, and so did her close friend, Kelly. The accusations were surprising. They concerned our first meeting almost 9 years ago, and they were untrue. I spent the following year trying to persuade myself these acts were done out of a misguided sense of self-righteousness. I've tried to correct the record and allow voices to be heard, but in keeping silent, I was wrong. The motivation for these attacks seemed simple. Carissa and Kelly were angry about a bad breakup I had with their friend Jackie nearly 7 years ago."
Chris went on to say that Carissa's claims were about revenge and were meant to destroy his reputation. He also said that he didn't even remember meeting Kelly, let alone touching or harassing her. In these posts, Chris said that he would be taking legal action and that he wanted damages and all the false statements about him taken back. He described the interview that he had with IGN as being the trigger for Carissa's tweets. Chris also went on to tell his version of the events that happened at DragonCon back in 2012 and added that Carissa had already deleted over 60,000 tweets from her account that contradicted the claims she made against him. Online, there were a few Reddit posts about Chris finally speaking out, and many people were sharing their views on the situation. One person said,
"About frickin' time he said something. Guess nothing of his is in Dying Light 2. Too bad for DL2. I'm more interested in seeing justice done, even if Chris is trying to be nice about it."
Between July and November 2021, Chris's legal battle continued. A Los Angeles judge named Theresa M. Traber heard the case against Carissa's, which was an early win for Chris. However, the claims against Kelly were thrown out because she lived in Illinois, and California courts can only deal with people and matters within the state's borders. Chris didn't let that stop him though. In September 2022, he filed a new lawsuit in Illinois where she lived. This case moved forward in November 2022. Both cases went to trial, then 6 months later, during a court-ordered mediation where both sides sat down with a neutral person and tried to work out their differences, something changed. On March 24th, 2023, Chris, Carissa, and Kelly reached a settlement. Finally, all the claims made against Chris were dismissed and could not be made again. On top of that, Chris walked away with a 7-figure payout and a signed statement from both women. On his Medium page, Chris shared this statement on March 25th, 2023.
"Mr. Avalone was never inappropriate with either of us. We have no acknowledgement that he has ever intimately abused any women. We have no acknowledgement that Mr. Avalone has ever misused corporate funds. Anything we said or written about Mr. Avalone to the contrary was not our intent. We wanted to support women in the industry. In so doing, our words have been misinterpreted to suggest specific allegations of misconduct that were neither expressed nor intended. We're passionate about the safety, security, and agency of women, minorities, LGBTQIA+ persons, and every other community that has seen persecution in the video game industry. We believe Mr. Alvalone shares a desire to protect and uplift those communities. We believe he deserves a full return to the industry and support him in those endeavors.
The statement ended with Carissa and Kelly saying they believed Chris deserved a full return to the industry. After that, Chris went on to say,
I appreciate the willingness of Mrs. Barrows and Mrs. Bristol to work with us in addressing issues within the gaming community, and their advocacy is to be commended and supported. There are still many very real challenges that we face, but I'm confident we can face them together. In the spirit of these goals, I would ask everyone to respect the privacy of Mrs. Barrows and Mrs. Bristol and use this opportunity as a means to listen to all voices in improving our culture and our communities.
2 days later, on Monday, March 27th, 2023, Carissa emailed media outlets and asked them to take back the statements she had made about Chris. And so, all the media outlets that had reported the story added editor's notes to their original articles with the update regarding the official ruling. Chris walked away from this experience and continued working hard to rebuild his reputation. Sadly, just 2 months later, in April 2023, his mother died. Then, in June 2025, 2 years later, Chris joined another game development company called Republic Games. And as of making this video, he still works there. The following year, on February 5th, 2026, 80 Level, a prominent global industry platform and media outlet that is dedicated to video game development, published an interview that they had with Chris. In it, Chris told them that he was working on 4 projects, but the main one is an unannounced dark fantasy game. He also said that he was enjoying it more than he thought he'd ever enjoy working on a project. No release dates have been given for any of the video games that he is working on, as they are still in the early stages of development. Chris spent 2 years taking legal action against false claims that were made about him, but the next person lost his reputation entirely, and it's something he will never get back.
The New Jersey judge agreed to release Mark Paulino, the man known as Santa Mark, from jail while he awaits his criminal trial for charges.
Jeffrey Duncan Jones was an accomplished actor, nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Emperor Joseph II in the 1984 film Amadeus. For a while, he was even the voice behind one of Fallout's most popular in-game characters, President Dick Richardson. His career was moving ahead quite nicely until he had a visitor at his Hollywood home. Jeffrey, the son of Douglas Bennett and art historian Ruth Evelyn Jones, was born on Saturday, September 28, 1946 in Buffalo, New York. He was only 11 months old when his father Douglas died on August 30th, 1947. Ruth was a single parent who did her best to support her son. As Jeffrey grew up, she encouraged him to pursue acting, which he did. By 1964, 18-year-old Jeffrey graduated from the Putney School in Vermont and enrolled as a pre-med student at Lawrence University. At university, Tyrone Guthrie, a British theatre director, noticed that Jeffrey had talent. In 1967, Tyrone asked Jeffrey to join the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 21-year-old Jeffrey accepted his offer and began a stage career of over 125 productions and 50 years. By 24, Jeffrey had moved from theatre to film, landing roles in films like Beetlejuice and Amadeus and TV shows like Deadwood, and doing some voice acting. In 1998, Jeffrey worked as a voice actor for Fallout 2, a post-nuclear role-playing game, which was released in October 1998. This was also the only voice acting work he ever did for Fallout. Jeffrey voiced the main villain, US President Dick Richardson, a strong patriot who used extreme policies aimed at wiping out all mutants. But while Jeffrey's career was moving along, the personal choices he made soon overshadowed that.
Well, hello there. Glad to make time for one of our gallant troopers, but I am rather busy, so, what can the President of the United States of America do for you?
During 1999, one of Jeffrey's acquaintances introduced him to a young male person who I will call Stephen. Stephen was just a regular kind of kid from Fontana, which is approximately 50 to 60 miles, or about 80 to 96 kilometers, from Hollywood. Between September 2000 and May 2001, Stephen visited Jeffrey at his home in Hollywood many times. When he visited Jeffrey, he was given a costume and props and told to pose for photographs. What actually happened during those visits wouldn't come out for months. About 6 months later, later, in November 2001, Stephen reached out to the Los Angeles Police Department, and he had a story to tell. He alleged that Jeffrey was involved in exploitation and told the police that Jeffrey had paid him to take part in these crimes at his home. The police then followed procedure and got a search warrant for Jeffrey's home, and during the search, they came across various explicit photographs and digital files. All the evidence that they gathered, along with Stephen's allegations, started what was to become an in-depth investigation. Finally, a year later, on November 13th, 2002, a warrant of arrest was issued for Jeffrey, and because he was a famous Hollywood celebrity, the case became international news. He was charged for using a young person for illegal acts and having illegal images of a young person. The next day, he handed himself over to the police, and later that day, he was released on a $20,000 bail. 8 days later, on November 1st, 2002, Jeffrey showed up in court and pleaded not guilty, and the case was pushed back for 7 weeks. Again, on January 9th, 2003, Jeffrey appeared in court, and this time the case was delayed for another 6 months. When Jeffrey finally went back to court on Tuesday, July 8th, 2003, he did something no one may have expected. He changed his plea to guilty. Rather than continuing to fight the charges, he accepted a deal and no longer fought them. As part of the deal, prosecutors dropped the charges related to having illegal material involving a young person. In exchange, Jeffrey admitted that he had paid a young person to pose for inappropriate photos. Jeffrey wasn't sent to prison, but placed on 5 years probation, meaning that he had to follow strict court rules under supervision. He also had to register as an intimate offender for life, banned from having any inappropriate material, and ordered to complete a year of psychological counseling followed by 2 years of drug and alcohol counseling. After his sentencing, Jeffrey told reporters,
"This concludes a really painful chapter in my life. I'm sorry that this incident was allowed to occur. Such an event has never happened before, and it will never happen again."
Immediately after Jeffrey's case was out in the open, his acting career was affected and studios removed him from upcoming projects. And by the time he was sentenced in 2003, his work had already dried up. He returned to the screens for a small role in Deadwood, but by 2007, his film and television career was basically over. But the story didn't end there. In October 2004, once he was an adult, Stephen sued Jeffrey for the abuse he had suffered. Stephen won because 2 years later, in 2006, he and Jeffrey came to a private settlement. For Jeffrey, the story didn't come to an end after the settlement because he was arrested twice more after his sentencing. Once in 2004 for failing to update his address in Florida, and then again in 2010 in Los Angeles for not updating his registration. When Jeffrey appeared before Supreme Court Judge David Horwitz, his guilty plea kept him out of jail, but he didn't walk away without consequences. The judge sentenced him to 250 hours of community service and another 3 years of probation. For 6 years after his 2010 arrest, Jeffrey basically lived out of the public light. But that changed in 2016 when a photograph of Jeffrey and 21-year-old Justin Bieber at a restaurant surfaced online. Yahoo News even wrote an article about the picture on July 25th. When some of Justin's fans recognized Jeffrey, they raised concerns online and called him a PDF. Fans also asked Justin if he knew about Jeffrey's history, but Justin never responded. Jeffrey had another blow when he was booked to appear at the November Rhode Island Comic Convention 2023. After the event organizers posted a promotional flyer that featured Jeffrey, many complaints came in from people who thought he should not attend the event. By September 2023, the organizers of the event removed him from the lineup and then shared a Facebook post saying that Jeffrey had been vetted and removed.
"Thank you for your understanding, and we do apologize for the error. Let us clarify that he was vetted and removed months ago. The mistake was ours for not realizing we left him on our scheduling calendar."
One person responded to the post saying,
"I guess I've been living under a rock. I had no idea he had done such things. A quick Google search has enlightened me to his awfulness. Why are so many of my childhood actors such disgusting people?"
According to fancons.com, a site where fans can find information about upcoming fan conventions, Jeffrey appeared at the Hollywood show in California on 2 separate occasions, once in January and then again in June 2025. During his June 2025 appearance at the Hollywood show, he was part of a panel with former co-stars to discuss the 1986 film Ferris Bueller's Day Off. On June 9th, 2025, the New York Post, a news outlet, shared an update on what was happening in Jeffrey's life.
"I moved to live in the desert. I didn't want to be in LA anymore, but I got my family here, and so little get old fast. I'm driving back and forth,"
he said.
"I'm getting a place now in LA. I've given up because I can't keep going back and forth from Burbank to the desert."
Jeffrey is now 79 years old and lives a rather isolated life. The choices he made tainted his legacy and exploited a young person whose true identity has never been revealed. In the next case, the choices someone made left a community stunned and digging for the truth.
Winchester Mystery House is opening new doors. As KPIX5's Ann Makovic reports, the San Jose attraction will now allow visitors to view parts of the home that have never been seen before.
In Fallout 4, there's a tourist attraction called the Grantchester Mystery Mansion. This mansion used to be a family home before a devastating nuclear war that took place in 2077. After the war, a dangerous man named Zachariah took over the mansion and made it his home. He used many hidden traps to lure in and kill anyone who wandered inside looking for supplies.
Enjoy your visit to the Grantchester Mystery Mansion.
The mansion was locked, and there was a guard that stood at the entrance. When players wanted to go inside the mansion, they had to either buy a ticket, find one, talk their way in, steal the key, or kill the guard and take it. Once players managed to get inside, they were guided from room to room by an automated narration system that operated the mansion. During these tours, there were instances where players couldn't move out of the room until the system had finished speaking. The tour always began on the main floor of the mansion, and from there, players would be led to the kitchen. Players would then have to find a way through a locked door, which would take them to the basement, where a disturbing scene of dead traders and mutated creatures awaited them. After that, players would be guided upstairs and more areas opened up. Some doors in the mansion stayed locked at first, and an automated weapon guarded part of the hallway. Once the players were directed to the second floor, they would find a seance room that was filled with gas, which could be shut off at a terminal. A seance room, in case you don't know, is basically a place where people gather to have spiritual meetings with the dead, usually through Ouija boards, for example. Then there was the child's bedroom and the parents' room, which is now occupied by Zachariah, who teased players through intercoms as they struggled to avoid his traps. From there, players could reach the attic, which was filled with junk, a weapons bench, and a chemistry station. But it was the design of the mansion that stood out most. There were doors that had been boarded up, windows that looked into other rooms, and staircases that led nowhere. Plaques that described the mansion's dark history were also scattered throughout the mansion, and often players would catch glimpses of a young girl's ghost. She was nameless and only appeared as Girl in the game. But she was the younger version of Lucy, the daughter of two Fallout characters named Hannibal and Morticia Grantchester. Lucy was an only child, and her parents shared names with famous horror characters Hannibal Lecter and Morticia Addams. Hannibal never really wanted children, and when Morticia got pregnant, that didn't change his feelings. In fact, things only got worse when Morticia almost died giving birth to Lucy. In the end, Lucy goes crazy and murders her parents, and eventually, after Lucy's death, the Nuka-Cola Corporation, the most dominated soft drink manufacturer in pre-war America in the Fallout lore, bought the mansion and turned it into a haunted tourist attraction. They also installed a narration system and informational plaques to help guide visitors through the Grantchester Mansion murder story.
Morticia nearly dies giving birth to their only child, Lucy.
Bethesda Game Studios released Fallout 4 Nuka-Cola World in August 30th, 2016, and players were introduced to the Grantchester Mystery Mansion alongside it. But what most players don't know is that when designing the mansion, developers looked to real-life places and events for inspiration, most notably the Winchester Mystery House, which is a real house with many interesting layers and can be found at 525 South Winchester Boulevard in San Jose, California. This house is a Victorian and Gothic-style mansion that was owned by Sarah Winchester, the wealthy widow of William Wirt Winchester. William was the heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms fortune, the company that manufactured the Winchester rifle. When he died in 1881 from tuberculosis, Sarah inherited about $20 million and 50% ownership of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Not long after her husband's death in March 1881, Sarah allegedly went to see a respected medium in Boston named Adam Coons. She believed she was being haunted by the spirits of the people who had been killed by Winchester guns. Legend says Adam warned her that if she ever finished building the house, the spirits would take her life. Not long after seeing Adam, Sarah moved from New Haven, Connecticut to California, and while she had a home in New Haven that she and William had built, she wanted to be closer to her family. Another reason for the move was because she had rheumatoid arthritis, a painful joint condition, so the warmer Californian climate would help her. 3 years later, in 1884, she bought a 45-acre and 2-story, 8-bedroom bedroom farmhouse in California and named it Yanada Villa. Sarah was interested in architecture, so the project gave her a new creative outlet, and soon construction began. Over time, as construction continued, the farmhouse became a massive home with staircases to nowhere, doors that opened into walls, and a maze-like design. Construction did not stop for 38 years and cost around $5.5 million. That's like around $71 million in today's money. Sarah died in 1922, and the mystery house was 24,000 square feet. That's 2,230 square meters. It had 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 180 rooms, 47 staircases and fireplaces, 17 chimneys, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens. After Sarah's death, the home became a historic landmark and tourist attraction. The Winchester Mystery House's story and strange architecture have inspired many writers, and many Fallout players have said it resembles the Grantchester Mansion.
70 years ago today, famous mobster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was shot and killed in Los Angeles.
The man who helped shape the famous Las Vegas Strip and later went on to inspire the Fallout games named New Vegas was relaxing at home in Beverly Hills. As he sat reading his newspaper, someone was watching him from outside. What happened next would cause rumors, theories, and one of the most talked about cases in American history. Benjamin Siegel, also known as Bugsy, was born on Wednesday, February 28, 1906 in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were Max and Jenny Siegel, and they were poor. Max worked long, hard hours for low wages as a cabinet maker, and Jenny was a stay-at-home mom. Despite their struggles, the couple had 5 children and did the best they could. And instead of pursuing a traditional career, Bugsy chose the streets. He left school early and spent his days on the streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side, where he joined a gang on Lafayette Street and started stealing. In 1918, 12-year-old Bugsy met Maya Lansky, and the two became close friends. Maya saw that the Jewish boys in his Brooklyn neighborhood needed to organize themselves like the Italians and Irish did, and soon he and Bugsy formed the Bugs and Maya Mob. Around that time, Bugsy crossed paths with Mo Sedway, a man who was born in Russian-controlled Poland. Mo was 12 years older than Bugsy, and together they ran a protection racket on the streets, which were schemes where business owners were forced to pay for protection from the very people who were threatening them. When Bugsy offered these protection services, the cart owners almost always turned him down at first, and when they did, there was hell to pay. Bugsy would fly into a wild rage, douse their carts in kerosene, light them on fire, and demand payment. When this happened, the peddlers, having little choice, would pay Bugsy's $1 fee for his protection. From 1920 to 1933, alcohol was banned across the US, and during this time, Bugsy became involved in transporting and protecting illegal alcohol shipments across major East Coast cities. As his reputation grew, he connected with mob figures like Frank Costello, which gave Bugsy a level of protection and influence that no street-level enforcer could have alone. Bugsy was involved in the substance trade, and he also ran pay-for-play rings on the side, which are basically criminal schemes where people can pay money to gangsters in exchange for favors and services, which can range from smuggling to committing financial or political scams. He was making a lot of money, and by his early 20s, he could afford a suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and a Tudor home in Scarsdale, New York. Over the years, he had earned a reputation for being dangerous, fearless, and loyal. Since childhood, Bugsy had also been friends with Al Capone, one of the most powerful gangsters in America. When the police had a warrant out for Al, Bugsy helped his friend out and let him hide out at one of his aunt's homes. It wasn't all work and no play for Bugsy. In fact, he played hard. The charming man liked to socialize, wore flashy clothing, and was very involved in the city's nightlife. About a month before his 23rd birthday, January 28, 1929, Bugsy married his childhood sweetheart, Esther Krakauer. But things weren't a fairy tale marriage, because even though the couple had 2 daughters, his lifestyle caused a lot of trouble because his wife and daughters were always high-profile targets for his rivals. And this is where things get even more interesting. The same year he married Esther, Bugsy and Maya started a new venture called Murder Incorporated and began to work as hitmen. They hired out their expert gunmen to other people who were transporting alcohol illegally in New York and New Jersey. Murder Incorporated was doing well, and by 1931, their operation reached its peak when Bugsy and Maya were hired to take out some mafia bosses. Bugsy and other members of the Murder Incorporated were involved in the killing of mob boss Joe Maciera. Salvatore Maranzano, Tony Fabrizio, Henry Greenberg, and then the rival loan shark brothers Louis Pretty Armberg and Joseph Armberg. In 1936, alcohol had already been legalized in the US for 3 years, and Bugsy was, so to say, in hot water. Rival mafia bosses wanted Bugsy dead, and he was in danger, so Myers sent him to Los Angeles. By that time, Bugsy had already quite a long criminal record that included armed robbery, rape, and charges for taking people out of this world, moved his operations west, where he focused on illegal gambling while keeping his ties to New York. When he was settled in Los Angeles, Bugsy brought in gangster Mickey Cohen as his right-hand man, and then forced local mob boss Jack Dragner into a lesser role. On paper, he earned his money through legal gambling, but in reality, he was running illegal betting operations across the city, building a drug route from Mexico and working with the Chicago mob. According to the New York Times, these operations were pulling in $500,000 a day. By 1942, Bugsy and Esther were living completely separate lives, and they eventually got a divorce, but not before he met a woman named Virginia Hill in Los Angeles, who was already an established crime figure by that point in time. She had a strong, outgoing personality, and the relationship between Bugsy and Virginia developed fast, both personally and professionally, and the two soon started dating. The new relationship didn't mean that Bugsy's problems were over, though. In 1946, the Chicago mob cut him out of his share of their joint gambling operations and handed his cut to Jack, which left Bugsy furious. But Bugsy was still making money because he controlled offshore casinos, a pay-for-play ring, and a network of politicians and lawyers who kept his name clean on the surface. Las Vegas was growing, and Bugsy saw new opportunities in the desert city. The first would be through illegal services connected to the workers who were building the Hoover Dam, and then later through early casino investments. Bugsy also helped finance and flip the El Cortez Hotel, a deal that made a profit of $166,000, which was enormous back then. In late 1945, Bugsy took over the final stages of the Flamingo Hotel project in Las Vegas after its original owner, Hollywood Reporter publisher Billy Wilkerson, ran out of money. The Flamingo's construction budget, which was being financed by the mob, started at $1 million, and Bugsy had expensive taste and little patience for being questioned about it. Calls from the mob men financing the Flamingo often went unanswered, and updates were few and scarce. This caused the mood back in New York and Chicago to shift from frustration to rage. Before the Flamingo opened to the public, a conference was held in Havana, Cuba, between Sunday, December 22nd and Thursday, December 26th, 1946. It was an important organized crime meeting that aimed to bring the American mafia together. The trap was described to the public as an event in honor of the Italian-American singer and actor Frank Sinatra, but that was just a cover story. Mob leaders were being watched by the FBI, and they needed a believable reason to travel without drawing unwanted extra attention to themselves. At the meeting, the mob investors turned their attention to Bugsy, the Flamingo, and the numbers that weren't adding up. Basically, the mob investors had agreed to invest money in the construction of the Flamingo in exchange for Bugsy sharing the profits with them in the long run. But by that time, the construction costs had already blown past $6 million, which is $5 million more than what the total construction cost was supposed to be, and there were growing suspicions that either Bugsy or the contractors were overcharging for materials. Mob associates had also learned that Virginia was making regular trips to Switzerland. They suspected that she was working with Bugsy to scam them and was making these trips to deposit large amounts of cash that she stole from the mob's investments into secret accounts. Whether the money was being mismanaged, stolen, or both, nobody knew, but the mob was watching, and their patience was running out. During their talks, the subject of killing Bugsy came up, and after some discussion, they agreed to hold off, at least for the time being. The mobsters agreed that the hotel's opening would decide his fate. If the Flamingo succeeded and it pulled in enough profits that they would get their money back, Bugsy lived, and if it didn't, the conversation would continue. Back in Las Vegas, on the same day the Havana conference ended, the Flamingo opened. Unfortunately, entering the doors of the so-called luxury resort felt more like stepping onto a job site. Loud construction noise carried through the hallways, and large sections of the hotel were completely blocked off because they were unfinished. The hotel rooms weren't ready either, which meant no one could actually stay the night. So when gamblers won money at the casino, they took their winnings and left instead of gambling them away again because there was nowhere to stay and nothing to keep them there. The opening did not go smoothly, and later that night, when Bugsy learned the casino was losing money, he became angry and verbally abusive towards guests. Despite that, the casino stayed open for a few weeks, and in that time, the Flamingo lost about $275,000 at the gaming tables alone. Finally, on Friday, January 17th, 1947, Bugsy closed the Flamingo Flamingo so that construction could be finished. Almost a month and a half later, the Flamingo reopened to the public on Saturday, March 1st, 1947, and started to make money. But by that point, the mob financiers had lost their patience. The costs kept climbing, delays kept mounting, and Bugsy was dodging calls, so they called a second meeting in Havana. 2 months later, in May 1947, the Flamingo was turning a profit, but nowhere near enough. The mob believed that Bugsy was pocketing some of the profits that were actually supposed to be for them, and they were fed up. In their opinion, he was unpredictable. They'd lost their faith and trust in him. At that point, they came to a final decision about Bugsy. When Bugsy heard about the meeting, he traveled to Havana to ask for more time to pay the mob investors off, but they were not budging and demanded that Bugsy pay the money he owed immediately, which caused Bugsy to go into a fit of rage and leave. Then, the following month on Friday evening, June 20th, 1947, Bugsy and his friend, Alan Smiley, visited Virginia at 810 Northern Linden Drive, Beverly Hills. Just before 11 p.m., he was reading a newspaper when someone opened fire through the window. 9 shots were fired from a rifle, and 4 of them hit Bugsy. None hit Alan. Bugsy was hit twice in the torso and twice in the head. One of the bullets even forced his eye right out of its socket, and the other hit his cheek. He died right where he sat with the newspaper still in front of him. Minutes after the murder, mob members walked into the Flamingo and took control of the 77-room, low-rise, modern-style building that was designed to feel like a tropical oasis. The Bugsy top-floor suite had window panes that were bulletproof, and there was only one entrance to it with 5 possible exits. This included a hidden ladder in a hallway closet leading to a basement tunnel, which connected to an underground garage where Bugsy allegedly kept a standby getaway car in case he ever needed an escape from a hitman, but that ship had long sailed. The mob then helped organize the sale of Bugsy's remaining shares, and the Flamingo thrived. In fact, it went on to set a whole new standard for Las Vegas casino resorts. After his murder, Bugsy's money paid debts and was distributed among mob associates, creditors, and family. When Bugsy died in 1947, he was 41 years old and worth about $5 million. This was a considerable amount in the 1940s. Estimates from Celebrity Net Worth and USA Today put that at roughly $100 million today. On June 26, 1947, Bugsy had a small funeral that was held in Los Angeles, California. The service lasted only 5 minutes. His ex-wife Esther, her children, Bugsy's brother and sister, and just one other person attended. Nobody was ever charged with Bugsy's murder. Virginia went on to marry an Austrian ski instructor and kept her ties with the mob. 19 years after Bugsy's murder, Virginia was found dead on a mountaintop in Austria on March 14, 1966, and her death was considered to be by her own hands. The Las Vegas Sun, an online newspaper, reported that the Flamingo is said to be haunted by Bugsy himself. There were reports of a man in a suit and the smell of cigars around the wildlife habitat and rose garden. Objects have reportedly moved, and strange sounds have been heard in the presidential suite and wedding chapel.
There's the Benny character. He's based on Bugsy Siegel.
He sure is.
That was at the Flamingo, which he founded.
Yeah.
Over 50 years later, on October 10, 2010, Bugsy began to share his time between the spirit world and the virtual world. The project director of Fallout New Vegas said the character Benny, the head of the chairman, was inspired by Bugsy himself. So the game, in a way, brought the mobster back to life. And in case you haven't played the game yet but plan to, I'd just like to give you a spoiler warning.
You're crying in the rain, Pally.
Guess who's waking up over here?
Time to cash out.
Fallout New Vegas is set in a post-apocalyptic version of Las Vegas, 20 years after a nuclear war reduced most of the world to ash. Against all odds, the city survived the war in the wasteland known as New Vegas. The neon lights and the casino still operated on the Las Vegas Strip, and there were gangs who fought behind the scenes to control it. And at the very center of that power struggle was Benny. In the game, the player is a courier who has been hired to deliver a package across the Mojave Desert. The package is a small platinum disc called the Platinum Chip, and before the delivery can be made, Benny moves in to get it. But he is a man of high position and doesn't do all his own dirty work, so he turns to the Khans, a gang that is feared in the wasteland. Under Benny's instructions, the Khans carry out an ambush in the desert. Then, once the Khans overpower and bring the courier to their knees, Benny steps forward. Next, he aims a weapon at the courier, pulls the trigger, takes the chip, and leaves the body behind. But the courier survives and then sets off across the the wasteland to find Benny. The courier finds clues along the way, and based on choices they make, the outcome of the game would be different. The character Benny is dressed in a black and white checkered suit, and he always has a smart remark. He operates out of the Tops Casino on the New Vegas Strip, one of the best places in the city. His behavior sent the message that he was the charming boss, and he called everyone baby and moved through rooms like he owned them. But Benny had some history, and he didn't actually own everything, because the real ruler of New Vegas was a man who lived in a secluded life named Mr. House. Years before the game began, Mr. House found Benny's tribe, who lived as savages in the wasteland, and he took them in. He cleaned them up, gave them the Tops Casino, and turned them into one of the most powerful gangs on the Strip. In reality, Benny owed Mr. House everything. Benny wanted to steal the platinum chip, which was the only thing that could be used to upgrade Mr. House's army of security robots so that they followed Benny's orders. He wanted to take over Mr. House's whole network and take control of New Vegas himself. The cons were only used by Benny, but when the courier survived and tracked him down, his plan fell to pieces. And when that happened, he could be confronted in the penthouse suite of the Tops, handed over to another powerful gang in the wasteland to be crucified in the desert or shot. Bugsy and Benny were killed in two different worlds, one fictional world and the other real. In the next case, the question, can people be pushed to harm others when they are told to, is asked, and the answer is disturbing.
Are we really gonna do this? It's open, we could just leave.
I couldn't, not after that.
We don't deserve to leave. A shining example. That's what it called us.
Joshua Sawyer was the project director of Fallout New Vegas at Obsidian Entertainment. One day, Joshua entered the developer Eric Fenstermaker's office and told him that Vault 11, which is a subplot in the game, must be inspired by Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is a short story about a small town that chooses one person each year to be killed. And later, when Joshua was asked if The Lottery and Vault 11 are connected, he confirmed on Twitter, now X, that they were. From there, Eric built the concept of Vault 11 around one question: what happens when people are forced to choose who dies? The Vault was also inspired by two psychological studies that were later called unethical. But in order to understand any of this, you first need to know about a man named Stanley Milgram, who is till date considered to be one of the most influential psychologists of all time.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Stanley was born on August 15, 1933 into a Jewish family in New York who operated a small bakery. His parents had moved to America from Eastern Europe almost 2 decades earlier during the First World War between 1914 to 1918 to escape, well, the war. As his dad Samuel Milgram was from Hungary and his mum Adele Israel was from Romania, and both of their countries had gone to war against one another, and Hungary ended up losing 70% of its historic land and 60% of its population. And after World War II ended in 1945, when he was just 12 years old, Stanley's relatives, who were still in Europe during the war and somehow survived being sent to Nazi concentration camps because of their Jewish heritage, stayed with his family in New York for some time. In 1946, Stanley was 13 years old, and at his bar mitzvah speech, which is a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony for boys, he reflected on his family's history. He said,
"As I come of age and find happiness in joining the ranks of Israel, the knowledge of the tragic suffering of my fellow Jews throughout war-torn Europe makes this also a solemn event and an occasion to reflect upon the heritage of my people, which now becomes mine."
Stanley's own words show that he was already trying to make sense of how people could let suffering happen. After graduation, he studied political science and earned his degree in 1954, but then realized that his real interests lay in trying to understand people. That curiosity led him to Harvard, where he earned his PhD in 1960 at the age of 27, and he became someone who studied how people think, feel, and behave in social situations. Immediately after his graduation, he became an assistant professor at Yale. It was at Yale that Stanley, inspired by the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, wanted to know why people obey authority even when it leads to harm, and how something like the Holocaust was allowed to happen, where 6 million Jews and 11 million people from other minorities were murdered. Stanley wanted to see if ordinary people would just obey authority when it meant harming someone else. He also wanted to examine the just following orders explanation, which is basically what what most of the Nazi war criminals had to say when they were asked about why they took part in the Holocaust. A year later, in August 1961, Stanley began what would later be known as his obedience experiment in a basement at Yale University. It was 3 months after the start of the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, and during his trial, the former Nazi officer repeatedly claimed, just like all other Nazi war criminals that were at trial, that he was just following orders and that he was not personally responsible for the mass murder of millions of Jews and other minorities such as disabled people, people of color, and people who followed different religions. Before the experiment began, Stanley and his students predicted that only 0 to 3% of people would follow orders given to them from someone they perceived to be an authority figure, even if it meant harming someone else. But they had no idea just how wrong they were. For some more context, it was already a topic of discussion within the psychology community that social pressure, basically the influence a person or group of people have on another person or another group of people, is a basic part of human condition, because human beings are naturally wired to feel the need to comply to the expectations that others have of them. We're basically conditioned to conform to anyone we think is an authority figure in our life, from listening to our parents when we're kids to obeying teachers in school, and later on in life this continues to be the case where most people subconsciously feel the need to do whatever anyone who they consider to be a superior tells them to do. For most people, that would be their manager or boss at work, or in some extreme cases, feeling the need to do whatever your toxic friend or significant other tells you to do if they make you feel like they're superior to you. But in the specific case that Stanley was trying to understand, it was normal everyday German civilians who listened to Hitler and carried out the Holocaust, in their own words, because they were told to, and psychologists have named this
destructive obedience.
But just like Stanley, most psychologists were not satisfied with this explanation for the Holocaust because they could not comprehend that a tragedy of this scale happened simply because humans are taught to obey authority figures from a young age. And so they came up with another explanation, that Germans in particular must be biologically different from other human beings because they never evolved past the early caveman era instincts. Or maybe their culture makes them more likely to be violent and kill people. This was later termed as the Germans are different hypothesis, and this was the second thing Stanley actually wanted to test out because unlike many psychologists at the time, he did not believe it, and so he wanted to run an experiment that tests destructive obedience in normal everyday American civilians who at the time were considered by many to be morally superior to Germans because their country thought the Holocaust was bad. And so Stanley and his students had sent out advertisements and flyers through newspapers calling out for volunteers to partake in their experiment, and volunteers were paid $4.50 an hour, which is around $45 in today's money, to take part in what they were falsely told was just a study on human memory. 40 men who were between the ages of 20 and 50 responded to the call, and they came from all sorts of backgrounds, from labor workers to well-educated professionals. In the experiment, 2 participants were made to sit across from one another at a table with only a screen separating them in between, so they could only hear the other participant and not actually see them. The participants were then made to draw out pieces of paper from a hat, and whatever role was written on the piece of paper they chose would determine their role in the experiment. And there were 2 possible roles. One was being a teacher, and the other was being a learner, and the participants had to play a word game, or so they thought. Basically, the participant who got the role of the learner was given a set of words to memorize, and once they were done, the teacher asked them to recall the set of words in the correct order, and if the learner got an answer wrong, the teacher gave them an electric shock. Each time the learner got it wrong again, the electric shocks only got stronger. This is where I also need to mention that all of the participants who were given the role of being the teacher were told that they didn't actually have to go ahead and deliver the electric shocks to the learner, and they could simply choose to walk out of the experiment whenever they wanted and would still receive the payment they were promised. The shock generator was placed on the table in front of the teacher and had 30 lever switches that were set in a horizontal line and labeled from 15 volts all the way up to 450 volts. Each setting was also labeled slight shock, danger, severe shock, and finally 3 X's, a label that didn't even try to describe what came next and was meant to cause people to think twice before using it. And every time the learner would get the wrong answer, the teacher was supposed to turn up the voltage of the shock generated by 15 volts higher than the last one. As the voltage rose, the learner protested, and after 10 wrong answers, the shock would reach 150 volts. He demanded release, and at 300 volts, he simply went silent after screaming and banging on the wall in pain. And to make matters worse, if the learner did not answer the teacher's question, that would also count as a wrong answer. So the teacher would have to continue to raise the voltage up until it reaches the fatal setting. And if the teacher hesitated or refused to deliver the shock at any point, one of Stanley's colleagues who was present in the room, who the teacher was made to believe was the actual experiment experimenter himself, gave 4 sets of instructions. The prompts were calm, deliberate, and always given in this particular order.
Please continue. The experiment requires you to continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no choice. You must go on.
If a teacher still refused after all 4 prompts, the experiment simply stopped. But about 65% went all the way up to the fatal setting, and everyone reached at least 300 volts, which all the teachers knew could cause life-threatening cardiac arrests in the person being shocked. Many teachers continued even while begging to be allowed to stop. But what the teacher did not know was that the learners were actually actors, and each answer learners gave was scripted. The so-called shocks that they were receiving were totally harmless, but the experiment was most definitely not harmless for the teachers, many of whom suffered long-term psychological trauma, and one participant in particular even had a violent seizure once the experiment was over. But this did not stop Stanley from repeating the same experiment all over again, multiple times with people of all ages and backgrounds, and some of them were still not of age. And the results were always the same, with 2 out of every 3 people who were given the role of being the teacher delivering shocks that they believed would kill the learner for not getting their word game right, simply because someone they believed was an authority figure told them to. Stanley's experiments later helped shape guidelines set by the American Psychological Association, the organization that sets ethical standards for psychological research in the US, who had to make sure that any psychological experiments that put participants at risk of long-term trauma never happen again. But this experiment is just one of the 2 that inspired Vault 11 in Fallout New Vegas, where residents were told that they must sacrifice one of their own or face extermination. The second experiment, on the other hand, was conducted by a guy named Philip Zimbardo, and is till date one of the most famous and disturbing experiments ever conducted because it involved real-life violence against innocent people, and you might have heard of it as the Stanford Prison Experiment. And it inspired the part where the residents of Vault 11 enforced rules on themselves simply because they believed they were being watched and how they abused power.
Right down this corridor in the basement of the psychology department is where we converted these offices and storage rooms to prison cells. And we had students like yourself, college students from all over the country, play the role to be the prisoners or guards.
Philip was born on March 23, 1933 in New York, and in 1971, at the age of 38, he conducted a study that became famous. Philip was both the superintendent, which is basically the manager, and the actual researcher who observes and gathers the data, though he later said that he felt more like the superintendent. Much like Stanley, Philip sent out advertisements for his study to which 24 men responded, and each volunteer was paid $15 a day, or $123 in today's money, to take part in the experiment, and the participants were picked at random to be split into 2 groups. The first group of 12 men were going to be prisoners, and the second group of 12 were going to be prison guards, but the ones who were supposed to be the prisoners were not told what was going to happen. Each of these men had agreed to spend 2 weeks recreating what life would be like in a real prison, and all of them were 18 to 23 years old who just wanted to make some extra cash during the summer break from high school or college. The entire experiment began on August 14, 1971, when police arrested 12 young men from Palo Alto, California, at their homes. The men were then taken to a makeshift prison in the basement of Stanford University, and at the time, some of them didn't connect the dots and believed they were actually being wrongfully imprisoned. Basically, to make the simulation feel immersive, Philip had to collaborate with the local police to stage surprise, televised arrests. When the prisoners arrived, they were stripped naked and humiliated by the guards who were actually just the other 12 participants of the study, and they were made to wear uniforms, caps, and ankle shackles. They were no longer addressed by their names, but only by their prison numbers. The guards went through their own transformation and were dressed in uniforms designed to make them feel like part of a unit rather than individuals. They were given a clear set of instructions: prevent escapes and do not physically abuse the prisoners, which they didn't listen to, and that was exactly what Philip wanted to study, to see if ordinary young men would abuse authority and power if they got the chance. On top of that, the guards were also handed sunglasses to make sure they never made direct eye contact with the prisoners. Inside the makeshift prison, prisoners were humiliated in extremely inappropriate ways, sleep deprived, and given severe punishments at random by the guards who were only using the prisoners for entertainment. By the second day, the prisoners started to rebel, and to put an end to this, the guards created a system of rewards and punishments to control them, and it didn't take long for the prisoners to become obedient and accept being treated as less than human. When Philip did not interfere, the good guards let the most cruel ones decide what was acceptable, and and many prisoners became depressed and disoriented. Prisoners were not allowed to use the restrooms after 10 p.m., which meant that inmates had to live in cells that had the smell of unemptied human waste buckets, and they were forced to clean toilets with their bare hands by the guards, who would also put bags over their heads or even lock them up in tiny closets if they were not obeying. Prisoner number 819 was one of the study's most striking examples. At some point during the study, prison guards started chanting, "Prisoner 819 is a bad prisoner," and they forced other prisoners to chant the same thing alongside some other rather humiliating things, accusing 819 of making a mess in the room, and Philip found 819 crying hysterically in a back room.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Philip, who was acting like the prison's correctional officer, asked him if he wanted to leave, but 819 refused because he wanted to go back and prove he was not a bad prisoner. But when the abuse continued and his mental state got worse, Philip had to personally step in and tell him that it's just an experiment and he can leave the study at any time, and so 819 left. Another prisoner known only as 416 in the prison, whose real name was Clay Ramsey, was a standby prisoner who joined the study late. Unlike other prisoners who faced a slow rise in cruelty, Clay experienced the situation at full intensity from the start. The prisoners told Clay that quitting was impossible and that it was a real prison, and so Clay went on a hunger strike to force his release. The guards did not like that, and they threw Clay in what was known as the Hole, which was basically a dark and cramped closet used for solitary confinement, where Clay was locked alone for 3 hours, even though the rules only allowed prisoners to be there for 1. On day 5 of the experiment, Christine Masluk, graduate student and Philip's girlfriend, visited the makeshift prison. Philip had asked her to interview some of the people who were taking part in the study, so she came to observe what was happening there for a while. By the time Christine arrived, 5 prisoners had already had emotional breakdowns and had been removed from the study. That night, when guards put bags over the prisoners' heads, chained them together and marched them to the bathroom, Philip saw Christine becoming tearful and asked her,
"I say, what's the matter?"
She replied,
"It's terrible what you're doing to these boys."
At first, Philip and his colleagues teased Christine about being a softie and downplayed her objections. Christine stormed out, and Philip followed her to the parking lot, and there they had their first serious fight in their relationship. Christine told Philip that the experiment had gone too far because it was harming high school and college students, and that he was taking part in cruelty. She also said,
"I couldn't understand how someone I thought I knew well, who I trusted and loved, would not see any problem in this."
Philip later said,
"I had so much invested in the research. I'd been watching it progress over the course of days, and I was on autopilot. I couldn't see what was wrong with it."
On the 6th day of the experiment that was planned to last 2 weeks, Philip shut it down. In case it's not already obvious, the study asked the question,
"Does evil come from the situation people are in or from who they are?"
Philip believed his study showed something frightening. Give people anonymity and power and they stop thinking for themselves, similar to what we see in military recruits who prior to their recruitment are just normal guys, act like during wars. The findings made Philip famous. They were taught in classrooms, cited in court cases, and eventually presented to Congress to help explain the abuses at Abu Ghraib, a prison in Iraq where the US military staff abused their power and tortured, mutilated, and killed prisoners basically for no reason. Philip died at the age of 91 on October 14th, 2024 at his home in San Francisco, California. Christine, who had later became his wife, was there with their children at the time of his passing. On October 19th, 2010, Fallout New Vegas was released, and with it, Vault 11. For some more context, Eric's Vault 11 stood west of Boulder City in the Mojave Wasteland, and its walls held decades of dark history. After the vault door closed, the residents had to choose one person each year to die so the rest could live. At first, it felt like order and rules, but it soon turned into fear and pressure as people formed groups and turned on each other to survive. After 16 years, the sacrifices stopped when people finally stood together and refused. In the end, only 5 people remained, and they found the vault's computer records, which showed the full history. Most of them could not live with the truth and took their own lives, because the twist was that they never had to sacrifice anyone at all, and a single refusal from the very beginning would have been enough. When a Fallout New Vegas player first went into Vault 11, they passed through a small building that was hidden in the mountains. At the entrance, several skeletons lay on the floor, and a 10mm pistol lay nearby. As the player moved past the skeletons, they would reach the main door to the vault. Once they went through the door, it would shut behind them, and there was no escape. Inside Vault 11, the sacrifice chamber was at the end of a long hallway. When the player went into the chamber, they would find a chair, a projector, a table, and a computer that spoke as if it had authority. The vault computer said,
"Welcome. Please sit in the chair. The show is about to begin."
Greetings, martyr, and welcome.
If you're here now, it means you've been offered up as a sacrifice so that your vault can continue to thrive.
Eric said this sequence was inspired by the verbal prompts used in Stanley's experiment. When the Happy Trails film strip came to an end, the walls slid open and automated guns fired. But if someone didn't take part in the experiment, the system did not punish them. Instead, it accepted their refusal, thanked them for valuing human life, and opened the vault door.
You've led a great life. Living it has been its own reward. But it is only the beginning. Close your eyes now. And imagine what joys await you in the next life. The afterlife. Can you see them? Good.